to There is a Method to the Madness. I am Rob Maxwell, and I'm an exercise physiologist. In the Method to the Madness, I explore with you why things may or may not work in the world of health and fitness. I use science to explain what you really need to know about current events in fitness and what you should simply ignore. All right, so this week I'm going to begin a series on exercise is medicine. I always loved that slogan, loved that saying. I cannot own it. I cannot say that I invented it because it actually comes from the American College of Sports Medicine, which is basically the governing body of our sports medicine world. And they have an exercise is medicine theme. And also one of my colleagues and friends in town, actually the whole family are friends, the Fultons, Dr. Fulton, Michael, and Brent use that slogan as well. It's a great slogan because you know what? Exercise is absolutely medicine. And today's topic is about exercise addiction and addiction in general. Before I get into that, I must thank our sponsors, Jonathan and Lyn Gildon at the Gildon Group at Realty Pros. Obviously, based on the name, they are real estate agents and they are absolutely the best. They hustle. They work very, very hard for you. I know them well. They have over 275 star reviews on Zillow and over 100 million sold between the two of them. That tells you right there they're good. Success begets success. I will list their information, how to contact them, in the show notes. All right, so let's talk a little bit about exercise is medicine and addiction. All right, so first off, we should understand what addiction is. All right, yes, we can be addicted to many different things. Matter of fact, all of us are addicted to many different things, or at least some things. And of course, the less amount of addictions, the least amount of addictions, the better. So addiction is basically defined as something that you will have withdrawals from if you cease using. So you're going to have withdrawals, meaning that you miss the substance or the event or whatever, and I'm going to get into that. Physiologically, so your body literally has withdrawal symptoms, okay, and that could be in the sense of like being fatigued, being anxious, tired, a little depressed, off your game, and in severe cases, much more worse than that. And it is also defined as something that has tolerance, meaning that it takes more and more and more to get the same effect. That's what tolerance is. So most likely you are addicted to coffee. I'm just making that assumption because most people in the United States are. I am. What does that mean then when withdrawals and tolerance? So I wouldn't say my addiction is very strong because I can kind of take it or leave it, but that's a little bit deceiving because then I'll have tea of some sorts which has caffeine, so maybe I'm not being completely reasonable and rational when I say that maybe it's not that bad, but I can say based on the definition of it that my withdrawals aren't that bad. Either that or the drama kings and queens out there in social media make it so much worse that I'm comparing myself to them. And don't worry, I'm going to get into that stuff too today. Isn't that fun? So maybe that's it, because I'll see people's posts or read their posts and it says, oh my God, I haven't had coffee in 2 days. And the first day I had this awful headache and I could barely get out of bed. And I'm thinking, well, I've never felt that way. My withdrawals from coffee maybe is I miss it a little, like, I don't feel quite as ready to go, but I don't know. I can kind of move on. But most likely it's our addiction to social media that makes that kind of extreme post. Or maybe you're listening to this and go, oh no, I have those extreme withdrawals from coffee if I don't have it. Okay, maybe so. I mean, that's possible, but that would be an example of withdrawals. Would be a little headachy, a little tired. Tolerance means that you need more and more and more. So in the case of coffee, it would be like 1 cup used to do it, now 2 cups, now 3 cups, now 4 cups. I also say in that case that hasn't really been my story either with that. But I will say that I have an addiction to coffee and caffeine, and leave it at that. So there could be an addiction to many, many different things. It can be the obvious, like that, and then cigarettes, which is the nicotine in the cigarettes. So that means it could be chewing tobacco or snuff. It could be vaping. It could be any form of nicotine comes in. It could be alcohol. And of course, that is one of the worst addictions because of the effects it has on a person's life. It can be over-the-counter medications. It could be prescribed medications. It could be illicit drug use. So, obviously those would be like cocaine and heroin and speed and things like that. But, it can also be activities, because activities fall in line with withdrawals and tolerance. So it can be sex. It can be the phone, meaning social media. There's an interesting study done where, and actually they use some kind of famous people from the news, and they use them as subjects, and you think that, a lot of these people who are so, look like they have it together, wouldn't have the same sort of silly addictions and mannerisms that we have, but of course that's not true. But I only bring that up because it was funny, and I don't want to mention the names of who they were, because then it's going to have a bias and you're not going to think as much about the study. That's just what we do sometimes, especially with news people. So I'll just leave it at that. But anyway, what they did was they took their phones away from them and put them close by where they could still hear the ding of the text message coming in, or whatever tone they used. So it was their very familiar tone. And they hooked them up to heart rate monitors and blood pressure and all this stuff. And they watched the physiological effect of the person once they registered in their mind that a text came in with a little ding, and then they rated their anxiety level, because they weren't allowed to check the text message. So then they rated the anxiety level. And what they found was it was greatly increased, as was the stress response, as was blood pressure and heart rate. And when they interviewed the people afterwards, they admitted, they said, boy, that was terrible. Like, I really needed to see who that was. I had, this information I needed, or I was just curious or whatever. So, that is, something that we all experience now. So it's very interesting. And I don't know if you've ever had phantom vibrate from your phone. That's another thing they're looking at now. And as soon as I heard about the study, I realized I do have that. If you ever put your phone, most likely iPhone, whatever, in your front pocket and you have it on vibrate, we put it in our front pocket, I think, because as men, women might put it in their purse, I don't know, or whatever. But, I think a majority of people do push it in their front pocket because they don't want to sit on it if they're going somewhere. They don't want it to slip out of their back pocket, which typically isn't as deep. So whatever, I think a lot of us do that. So obviously enough people did that to where they studied it. And what they found was that people all of a sudden start to feel a vibration that isn't there, because they're so used to the phone buzzing in and checking it that they now have a thing called phantom vibration, where they studied and asked people if they ever felt a vibration in their pocket when they didn't even have their phone in that pocket, and they said, yes, I've had that response. So, we've gotten pretty addicted to that, and we can get pretty addicted to social media, which most of the time comes from our phone. So that's obviously not a substance like caffeine, like nicotine, like alcohol, like drugs, like amphetamines. So it is a device, it's a tool, it's a thing. And then I've already stated sex. And then the other addictions can be people's approval. And the one I want to focus on today is exercise addiction. Okay? They all fall into the same realm. Now, when I taught sports psychology at the college level. The chapter on addictions and exercise addictions started with, is there such a thing as a healthy addiction? That's the question of the first chapter in the book. And we asked that question to the students, and I'm asking that question to you. And most people, I would say, I can't remember exactly, I just remember knowing it was the majority. So let's say 75% of the kids raised their hands, students I should say, and said, yes, there's a difference, and there is a good thing in a healthy addiction. It is okay. It is not as bad as a negative addiction, such as alcohol or what have you. And I don't want to throw judgments in there because, addictions are illnesses, okay? So what do you think? Right? What do you think? So, this podcast is about, exploring ideas together. All my podcasts are. If you've listened to me, I've been on the air maybe now almost a year, maybe getting close. I'm, pretty laid back with this. Like, I'm not doing it to make a ton of money. People are surprised when I say I don't edit. I don't edit. I mean, if I say a stupid word, if I screw up a little bit, who cares? I'm trying to get a message across. I don't have my incoming message like choreographed and set up and plugged in. This is about trying to talk about things that I believe I know about and trying to create conversations. So, if you're sitting there listening, pretend we're having a conversation. What do you think? Because I know I talk to some of my friends. Sometimes I ask clients, so do you think like positive addiction is a good thing? So, well, what do you mean? Well, like exercise, that's considered a positive addiction. Is there any such thing as a positive addiction? And, most will say, yeah, it's a good thing. Now, a lot will also say, well, it beats the alternative, meaning an addiction to a bad thing. And that's probably true. And then, but some will say that no, there's no such thing as a good addiction. Well, guess what, ladies and gents? That's what the research says. There's no such thing as a healthy addiction, even if it's to exercise. And a lot of times what we do, and I've studied the world of addiction. I have worked in the world of addiction. I've had my own issues with different things. I know addiction, okay? Worked at Stuart Marchman. I worked at Laurel Oaks in Orlando when I was a college student. I worked postgraduate as a counselor at Stuart Marchman with alcohol-dependent individuals, kids, residential adolescent program. I understand it well. So I'm not just like speaking about exercise. I know addiction. And I could tell you right now, the experts in medicine and everywhere else say, no, there really is not a good thing in any kind of addiction. There's no such thing as a positive addiction. There just isn't. And so when I talk about this, it's very important to understand that it's not a value judgment. I think that's where we really tend to get in trouble when we talk about these things, because somebody will say, well, it's not bad. It's not a bad thing. It's better than this. Well, yeah. I mean, number one, sure, it's better than this. Meaning if we're discussing whether a running addiction is better than a cocaine addiction. I mean, I think you'd have to be pretty thick in the head to think it's not. Of course it is, right? But, as far as it being a bad thing and a good thing, there really is no such thing. I used to know this individual, and he was addicted to, I should say I still know him. But one of the things he used to say a lot, which I always admired, he was addicted to alcohol. And he used to say, look, this isn't a good or a bad thing. If I could get away with it safely, I still would. He was speaking of his alcoholism. He said, if I could do this and cut it off before I got into trouble, whatever that trouble might be, I would still do it. The problem was, in his words, he couldn't. So it's not a good or a bad thing. It's a matter of, does it work or not work? And recently, people have been throwing around this statement a lot, which I also agree with. Nature always wins. And they were talking about the hurricanes and some of the problems with overdevelopment and things like that, and people like lining up and fighting over whether it was partially to blame of overdevelopment or could they have done more with keeping more land where there's soil and such, and it's this me versus you type of thing. And it's like, well, I don't know if it's good or bad, but nature is going to win. And there's a lot of truth to that, right? I mean, I think there's absolute truth to that. And there's absolute truth to that with addiction, because nature is going to win. So it's not that it's good or it's bad. It's that, is it healthy and is it going to work? Okay? Because most people, all people I should say, are choosing their drug of choice to either relieve themselves of some kind of discomfort, to forget about some kind of emotional or mental discomfort, or to put themselves in a state of euphoria. That is what addictions are supposed to do. In other words, that is what the substance is supposed to do. And whatever it is, it does work at first. The problem is, does it continue to work where there's no consequences? And that is where it's not good or bad, it's just a fact, okay? So let's look at exercise. So remember, in the beginning of this podcast, I defined to you what an addiction was, right? So an addiction is present. See, if I really cared that much about flubbing my words, I would go back and edit that, but I don't care. If you're judging me, don't listen. I don't care about that either. So an addiction is defined as either having a tolerance or withdrawal. So both of those need to be present. So with exercise, you will see people build up that tolerance very quickly. Maybe there's such a thing called symptom substitution. We see it a lot in our world, and you also see it a lot in the world of recovery, where people like quit drinking, quit drugging, and start running. We call it symptom substitution. Again, yes, it's better, okay? It's better. Is it good though? No. So they'll start running, and then, they run a couple miles, feels good. They run a few miles, that's good. Next thing you know, they're like doing crazy amount of miles in a short period of time. And it's not because they're necessarily trying to get more fit. And it's not because of anything other than the fact that they have built up a tolerance. So what used to give them a sense of euphoria was 2 miles, then it became 3, then it became 4. And then if they're, not really close to that, they feel like, oh man, I should have done more, blah, blah, blah. The OCD kicks in, which is a part of addiction. And next thing you know, they have stress fractures of their pelvis, of their shins, of wherever. Maybe they have knee injuries, ankle injuries, hip injuries. Next thing you know, 30 years later, they have hip replacements and all this kind of stuff because they weren't necessarily running for, and here's the judgment, right reasons. So Ken Cooper, the famous cardiologist who started the Cooper Institute of Fitness. So if you've ever heard of the Cooper test or a lot of the different tools we use in the health and fitness world, it all comes from Dr. Ken Cooper, and he's called the father of aerobics, right? So here's the father of aerobics. I shouldn't say right, you may not know that. He is called the father of aerobics because he helped start the big running boom of the 70s and talked about not only is it good for runners, but it's good for your heart. And he's right. He went on to say, though, that anybody that runs more than 30 miles a week is doing it for more than their fitness. So 30 miles a week, as we look back on it, it's kind of an arbitrary number, It doesn't necessarily have to be 30. So if you're listening to this and go, I better not run more than 30, that wasn't his point. His point is that you can get really aerobically fit with that amount of work that you put in. And if you're doing more than that, reasons could be healthy, like you're an athlete and you are training for a really long distance event and your motive is you want to absolutely be your best and you really don't show signs of an exercise addiction. Yeah, that's cool. Or it could be really unhealthy and you're doing more than that because you think you have to, or you don't feel right if you don't. Now, what I see in my world a lot is that you see a lot of people that are doing a lot of these long endurance events, and a lot of things don't add up. Like, they're not as competitive as you think they could be with the amount of time that they're putting in. They seem to be away from their families a lot. They're doing all this kind of stuff, and it's like, it's a lot easier to be accepted in society if you say you're training for an Ironman or marathon or something like that, or an ultra marathon, than it is to say that you're basically suffering from an exercise addiction, right? Because nobody's going to come out and say, well, I'm really doing those 8 hours on the weekend because I'm addicted to exercise. Nobody's going to say that. But if they say I'm training for this or that, then people go, oh, okay, because part of the addiction cycle that everybody in that world is into the social media, because then they're posting all this stuff, and that's an addiction in itself, and that is also not healthy. So the amount of tolerance that is built up for these people becomes eventually to a point where their body cannot do it anymore, or their neuromuscular systems in their brain and their central nervous system starts to break down, and then they start to have almost like nervous breakdowns, and God forbid they can't do some of the exercise anymore, because then they absolutely go crazy. And I've heard people even say that. It's like, well, that's not good. And then, that's the tolerance build-up point. And then the withdrawal point is that they just can't seem to function unless they get their fix. And then they're not very good at whatever they're supposed to do that day, their job, their life, their family, whatever. So those aren't healthy things, okay? They're not healthy things. So fitness is supposed to be part of wellness, which is supposed to be part of sharpening the saw, as Stephen Covey used to say. It's supposed to be about, how am I making myself physically better so I can be better at the job of life? Because life can be very hard, right? I mean, we all have responsibilities. We have to put food on the table, or we have to contribute in some ways, right? We always say there are no free rides. That's true for everybody. We all have to contribute. We hopefully want to contribute good to the world. We hopefully want to do good things. We hopefully want to, the phrase I love is, leave something better than how we found it. I hope that's how most of us go into our days, right? We don't want to be negatively impacting our world. We want to be positively impacting our world. So physical fitness is supposed to help us do that, and I love it. I mean, I've been doing this a very long time, not only as a career, but even longer as a person who loves it. And I struggle with the whole, got to do 2 to 3 hours of exercise a day type of thing that I know a lot of people do. I'm not into it. After a certain point, I want to be done. Like, my kind of zone, I guess you'd say, is somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes a day, I think. And that's broken up. Like, that's doing different things. Occasionally it could be longer if I do like a longer bike ride on the weekends, and occasionally, like I said, but even there, it's like after 30 or 40 miles, my butt area is getting raw, and I'm like, ugh, this is no longer comfortable. So I haven't really had those types of tendencies, although I'm not trying to sit up here on my high horse, because I've clearly been addicted to other things. I think we all have, but that's just not been one of them. So why is it not positive? Because if the idea is to contribute and to make the world a better place and all those kind of things, or simply just survive, is it going to help you do that if you have an addiction to exercise? Because eventually, nature is going to win. It's not right or wrong. It's nature is going to win. If you are exercising for those unhealthy motives, eventually nature is going to win. When? Who knows? But there will be physical breakdowns, there'll be emotional breakdowns, because that's what addiction does. I don't care if it's heroin, alcohol, exercise, sex, your phone, whatever. Eventually, there's going to be a demise. Prove me different. Show me one situation where that hasn't been the case, right? Show me one situation. Alcoholics always say that the end result for them is going to be institutions, jails, or death if they didn't stop, right? So they get it, So show me a situation where a person could be addicted to exercise and they just keep going and going and going. I mean, where they don't end up divorced because their spouses or partners just can't take it anymore. They don't end up physically broken down. They don't end up emotionally breaking down. Because as I read in one of my books I like to read the other day, The Daily Stoic, he said something to the effect of that those people who run too much are running away from something. So eventually you're going to keep running, you're going to realize you can't find it. So it just doesn't work, okay? And I'm not meaning to be depressing here, because exercise is phenomenal. Exercise is absolute medicine. And I believe you can pull yourself out of this, but you're going to have to understand that it's a problem, like everybody else, and only if it's a problem. Again, I used to have this not debate, because, lecturing in class, once I started to get this point across, the students, they see the research themselves, so they're in agreement, so it's not really a debate. But you don't know, by the way. It was even a test. I would say a person is doing this much exercise for this amount of time, and I would list like a whole ton of minutes, right? And then it would be multiple choice, and one of the multiple choice selections would be, do they have an exercise addiction? And of course, students always want to please the teacher, so they'd say yes, right? And then they'd get mad at me because the answer was no, because below all that was D, which said you don't know because you don't know their motive. So that's what I want everybody to keep in mind. You don't know anybody's motives, I don't think, unless they're a close friend of yours who talks to you. You don't know their motives. So we can't base it on how much they're doing, because for all as you know, they might be a professional athlete and they're doing an Ironman and they're getting paid for that, and they do it. So okay. Or they could be doing it because they do have an addiction. You don't know. So only they can know. Only they're the ones that need to come for help, right? But the good news is, if you're listening and you have a problem, there is help, but the help is going to come from professional help. Just like, it wouldn't be an exercise coach or something, because I've had people come to me and I'm like, no, this goes beyond that. Like, this is one symptom of other addictions you probably have. So you need to, seek other kind of help for that. After they do, then I can help them come up with an exercise plan that's more reasonable for them, for sure, because we want people to continue to be fit, of course. But there is help. But the other thing you can do, as the person listening to this podcast, is don't praise it. We do that too much. You probably have people on your social media feed that are constantly doing something physically that seems to you a little bit out of the ordinary and seems to be a little unhealthy, because they post about it constantly, and it just kind of seems excessive. If it seems that way, that saying? It probably is. Do you berate them? Do you embarrass them? Do you call them out? No, and you probably don't even confront them. It's not your business. But do you have to praise them? Likes, loves? You're rewarding their behavior. It's no different than, you have an alcoholic in your family, and every time they go out and get drunk, you pat them on the back. I mean, it's, again, that's pretty extreme, but you don't want to reward the behavior, because I'm telling you, it's not healthy. Nature always wins. Exercise is absolutely a critical part of our lives and should be. But taken too far, it's an addiction. Nature always wins. It will not end in anything good. Okay? So, let me thank our newest sponsor, chiropractic physician Doris Antos, who's an absolute fantastic chiropractor. She's been in service for 18 years. She's an Ormond native, and she has been in the area serving people for a very long time. She went to our famous great chiropractic school here, Palmer in Port Orange, and I know for a fact she works with many of my clients how good that she is. I will post her information in the show notes, and if you need any help, and by the way, that is a very great way to help you get your mind and body centered. Chiropractic tools are a great way to help you with all different kinds of problems, not just musculoskeletal. All right, so give her a shout. Until next time, be Max Fit and be Maxwell.